5 bullets. .4. 5 caliber hollow points. That isn't an accident. That is an execution. But those bullets weren't meant for the 24-year-old waitress trembling in the emergency room. They were meant for the most feared woman in Chicago, the mother of Dante Russo, the city's shadow king. When the smoke cleared on that rainy Tuesday in October, the hierarchy of the underworld didn't just shift, it shattered, because the girl bleeding out on the pavement wasn't family. She wasn't a soldier. She was a ghost no one had ever noticed until she made the ultimate sacrifice. This is the true story of Sienna Cole, the girl who stepped in front of a death sentence, and the secret that left even the coldest hitmen in tears. Chicago, October 12th, 2023. The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, the kind that rattles window panes and seeps into the bones of the city. Inside the penthouse suite of the Gregorian Hotel, however, the air was still. It smelled of expensive leather, cigar smoke, and the faint, antiseptic scent of lilies. Sienna Cole adjusted the collar of her uniform. It was stiff, scratching against her neck. She was invisible here. That was the job description. Be present, but absent. She wasn't a maid, exactly, and she wasn't a nurse, though she had the training for the latter. She was a companion for Caterina Russo, a 70-year-old matriarch who was losing her battle with Parkinson's, but had lost none of her venom. "You're shaking the spoon, girl," Caterina snapped, her voice thin but sharp as cracked glass. Sienna didn't flinch. She steadied her hand, bringing the silver spoon of broth to the older woman's lips. "It's the wind, Signora." The building sways a little on the high floors. It was a lie. The building was solid steel and stone. Sienna was shaking because Dante was in the room. Dante Russo stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to them. He was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, tailored in a charcoal suit that cost more than Sienna would earn in a decade. He was on the phone, speaking in low, rapid Italian. Sienna didn't speak the language, but she understood the tone. It was the tone of a man ordering an airstrike. He hung up and turned around. His eyes were the color of cold brew coffee, dark, alert, and entirely devoid of warmth. He didn't look at Sienna. He rarely did. To him, she was furniture, a utility. "Mother," Dante said, walking over to the bedside. "We are moving you to the estate tonight. The city isn't safe." Caterina pushed the spoon away, splattering broth on Sienna's white apron. Sienna immediately dabbed it with a napkin, her movements precise and practiced. "I am not leaving my home because a few Bratva dogs are barking," Caterina hissed. "Your father built this city, and I am trying to keep you alive in it," Dante replied, his voice flat. He finally glanced at Sienna. It was a cursory check, like looking at a clock on the wall. "Pack her things. We leave at 1800 hours. Sharp." "Yes, Mr. Russo," Sienna whispered. As Dante walked out, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him, Sienna felt the air return to the room. She had been working for the Russo family for 6 months. She needed the money her younger brother, Toby, was in a specialized facility for addiction recovery in Wisconsin, and the bills were astronomical. The agency had placed her here because she was discreet. She had no social media, no boyfriend, no criminal record. She was a blank slate, but she wasn't blind. She knew who Dante Russo was. The papers called him a businessman. The streets called him Il Macellaio the Butcher. He ran the shipping yards, the unions, and the high-stakes poker rings. He was a monster in a silk tie. Yet, there were moments, late at night, when Caterina was asleep. Sienna had seen Dante sitting by his mother's bed, simply holding her hand, his face buried in her palm. He looked exhausted then, human. It was those moments that terrified Sienna more than the guns she knew his bodyguards carried. It's easy to hate a monster. It's dangerous to understand a man. The afternoon passed in a blur of packing. The tension in the penthouse was palpable. Security detail increased. Large men with earpieces, men named Rocco and Sal, paced the hallways. They checked the elevators. They checked the vents. "They're nervous," Caterina muttered as Sienna folded her silk scarves. The old woman was sitting in her wheelchair, staring at the grey skyline. "Dante is nervous. He thinks I don't see it." "He loves you, Signora," Sienna said softly. Caterina scoffed, but her eyes softened. "Love is a weakness in our world, child. It's a target painted on your back." She looked at Sienna, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. "You have no one. Do you no husband, no children, no mom?" "Good," Caterina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Attachments get you killed." At 5:45 p.m., the convoy was ready. 3 black SUVs idled in the underground garage. The plan was standard. Dante in the lead car, Caterina and Sienna in the middle, the precious cargo, and a heavy security detail in the rear. They took the private service elevator down. The garage was cold, smelling of gasoline and damp concrete. Dante was waiting by the middle SUV, holding the door open. He looked tense, his jaw tight. "Get her in, quickly," he commanded. Sienna maneuvered the wheelchair, helping Caterina into the back seat. As she buckled the old woman in, Dante's hand brushed Sienna's arm. It was accidental, electric. He pulled back as if burned. "Sit on the other side," he ordered Sienna. "Keep her head down if I say down." "I understand," Sienna said. She climbed in. The door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. As the convoy rolled out of the garage and into the rainy Chicago evening, Sienna watched the raindrops streak across the bulletproof glass. She had a bad feeling, a knot in her stomach that felt like swallowed lead. She looked at Caterina. The old woman was clutching a rosary, her knuckles white. "It's okay," Sienna lied, reaching out to cover Caterina's trembling hand with her own. "We'll be at the estate in an hour." They turned onto Wacker Drive. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. Sienna didn't know it then, but she would never make it to the estate. And the rosary in Caterina's hand would be the only thing that didn't end up covered in blood. The ambush didn't happen on the highway. That would have been too predictable. And Dante Russo didn't make mistakes with routes. It happened at a choke point, a construction zone on a narrow one-way street near the river, where the convoy was forced to slow to a crawl. It was 6:12 p.m. Sienna was looking out the window at a homeless man pushing a cart when the world exploded. The lead SUV, the one Dante was in, hit a pressure plate mine concealed under a steel road plate. The explosion was deafening, a concussive wave that lifted the heavy armored vehicle 3 feet into the air before slamming it down on its side. "Dante!" Caterina screamed, a sound so raw it tore at Sienna's heart. "Stay down!" Sienna shouted, unbuckling her seatbelt and throwing herself over the old woman's lap. Chaos erupted. The rear SUV was rammed by a garbage truck that swerved out of an alley, pinning the security team against the concrete barrier. Then came the gunfire. It was rhythmic, precise. Automatic rifles. The sound of bullets hammering against the bulletproof glass of their SUV was like hail on a tin roof. Thwack, Thwack, thwack. Spiderwebs of white cracks appeared on the windows, but they held. "Driver, get us out of here," Sienna yelled at the front, but the driver, a man named Enzo, was slumped over the wheel. A single high-caliber round had punched through the windshield's weak point, the seam near the frame. He was gone. They were sitting ducks. Sienna looked up. Through the cracked window, she saw figures emerging from the shadows of the construction site. They wore tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas. They weren't moving like street thugs. They moved like a SWAT team. They were coming for the door. Katerina's door. Sienna's mind went blank. Fear, usually a paralyzing cold, turned into a strange, white-hot clarity. She looked at Katerina. The woman who had scolded her for shaking a spoon was now a sobbing mess, calling out for her son, Dante. Sienna glanced at the overturned lead vehicle. Smoke was pouring from the hood. The driver's side door was kicked open. Dante crawled out. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his suit torn, but he was moving. He had a handgun drawn. He fired 2 shots, dropping one of the attackers, but he was pinned down by suppressive fire from the scaffolding above. He couldn't get to them. He was 30 feet away, screaming something Sienna couldn't hear over the roar of gunfire. His eyes locked on his mother's car. He looked helpless. For the first time, the King of Chicago looked utterly helpless. The handle of their SUV turned. The lock disengaged. The electronic locks had shorted out from the blast, or they had a master key. The door was ripped open. The cold air rushed in, smelling of cordite and rain. A man stood there. He was huge, blocking out the streetlights. He raised a suppressed submachine gun, leveling it directly at Katerina's chest. There was no time to think, no time to calculate. Katerina froze, staring down the barrel. Sienna didn't freeze. In that fraction of a second, Sienna didn't think about her brother in rehab. She didn't think about her empty apartment or her unpaid bills. She saw the gun. She saw the old woman. She saw Dante, 30 feet away, roaring in silent agony as he tried to run toward them through a hail of bullets. Sienna lunged. She threw her body across the back seat, shielding Katerina completely, turning her back to the open door. Pop, 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 pop. It didn't feel like pain at first. It felt like being punched by a heavyweight boxer. 5 distinct impacts. 1 in the right shoulder, 1 in the lower back, near the spine, 2 in the ribs, 1 piercing the left lung. The force of the bullets slammed Sienna against Katerina. The old woman screamed, but Sienna couldn't hear her anymore. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. She slid down, her body going oddly limp. She hit the floor mat of the SUV. The shooter paused, perhaps surprised that the target was covered, or perhaps out of ammunition. That pause was his last mistake. Dante Russo was there. He didn't run. He collided with the gunman like a freight train. There was a sickening crunch of bone as Dante slammed the assassin against the doorframe. He didn't use his gun. He used a combat knife, driving it into the man's neck with a primal roar of rage. The gunman fell. Silence seemed to rush back into the street, heavy and suffocating. The remaining attackers were fleeing, sirens wailing in the distance. Dante ripped the rear door fully open. "Mama, mama!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Katerina was covered in blood, but she was shaking her head, sobbing, pointing down. "Not me. Dante, not me. It's the girl, it's Sienna." Dante looked down. Sienna was curled on the floorboards, her white uniform now a deep, glistening crimson. Her breath was coming in wet, bubbling gasps. pink froth was forming on her lips. Dante froze. The man who had cut throats without blinking, the man who had ordered hits over dinner, felt his stomach drop out of his body. He fell to his knees on the wet asphalt, reaching inside. "Sienna," he said. His voice was trembling. He grabbed her, pulling her upper body out of the car, cradling her against his chest. Her blood immediately soaked into his ruined shirt. It was warm. Too warm. "Look at me," he commanded. But the authority was gone. It was a plea. "Look at me, Sienna." Her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused. She looked up at the rain falling from the dark sky. Then her eyes found his face. She tried to speak, but only a gurgle of blood came out. She lifted a hand, her fingers trembling violently, and brushed the spot on his forehead where he was bleeding. "You're okay," she whispered. The words were barely audible. "She's okay. She's fine. You saved her. You saved her. Sienna." Dante pressed his hand over the wound in her chest, trying to stem the flow. The blood pushed through his fingers, relentless and hot. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? That is an order. Stay with me." Sienna smiled. It was a faint ghost of a smile. "No more shaking spoon," she breathed. And then, her eyes rolled back. Her hand dropped from his face, hitting the wet pavement with a splash. "No!" Dante roared. He scooped her up in his arms, standing up. He didn't wait for the ambulance. He didn't wait for his backup. "Get the car!" he screamed at the surviving security guard, Rocco, who was stumbling toward them. "Get the other car now." He held Sienna close, her blood mixing with the rain on his skin. He looked down at her pale, still face. She looked so small, so fragile. "Don't you die on me," he whispered into her hair, a tear leaking from his eye, the first tear Dante Russo had shed in 20 years. "I don't even know you. Don't you dare die before I know you." As the sirens closed in, the Shadow King of Chicago stood in the rain, holding the invisible girl who had just taken 5 bullets for the woman who treated her like furniture. And in that moment, Dante Russo knew that if she died, he would burn the entire world down to find the men responsible. The ride to St. Deso, Jude's a private, off-the-books clinic in the suburbs, was a blur of motion and terror that felt agonizingly slow to Dante. The SUV tore through red lights, Rocco leaning on the horn, the siren they had illegally installed wailing like a banshee. In the back seat, Dante Russo was no longer the Shadow King. He was a tourniquet. He had ripped off his expensive silk tie and bound it tightly around Sienna's upper thigh where a ricochet had grazed an artery. But the chest wounds were a nightmare. Every time the car hit a bump, Sienna made a small, wet sound that sounded like a drowning kitten. It made Dante's blood run cold. "Stay with me," he growled, his hand pressed over the worst of the holes, just below her heart. The blood was hot, sticky, and endless. It coated his hands, his cuffs, his soul. "Rocco, if you don't get us there in 3 minutes, I will put a bullet in your head myself." "We're here! Boss! We're here!" Rocco screamed, drifting the heavy SUV into the ambulance bay of the clinic. The doors flew open before the car even stopped. Dr. Aris, a Greek surgeon who had patched up more Russo soldiers than he could count, was waiting with a gurney and a team of 4 nurses. They knew the protocol. No questions, no police, just save the life. Dante didn't wait for them to lift her. He carried her out, placing her onto the stretcher himself. Her head lolled back, her skin the color of ash. She looked dead. She looked so agonizingly dead. Gunshot wounds. 5 count, Dante barked, running alongside the gurney as they rushed her through the double doors. Chest, abdomen, shoulder. Possible spinal involvement. She's losing blood fast. Doctor. Aris shone a pen light into Sienna's eyes. Pupils are sluggish. Get her to trauma 1. Prep the OR. I need 4 units of O negative. Stat. He looked at Dante, stopping him at the swinging doors of the surgical wing. Dante, you stop here. I am coming in, Dante said, his voice a low rumble. He was covered in her blood. He looked like a demon rising from hell. You are not, Aris said firmly, putting a hand on Dante's chest. You are not sterile, and you are in shock. If you come in, you compromise the field. Do you want her to die? Dante froze. The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Save her, Dante whispered, gripping the doctor's scrub top. If she dies, Aris, if she dies, burn this building down with me inside it. Go wash up, Dante. The doors swung shut, cutting off the view of Sienna's pale hand, hanging off the side of the gurney. Dante stood there for a long time, staring at the brushed metal of the doors. The adrenaline began to crash, replaced by a shaking that started in his hands and took over his entire body. He looked down at himself. His charcoal suit was ruined. His white shirt was red. He turned and walked mechanically toward the waiting room. It was a sterile, private lounge designed for high-end clientele. Leather chairs, espresso machine, muted TV. Katerina was there. His mother was sitting in a wheelchair, a blanket draped over her shoulders. A nurse was cleaning a cut on her cheek. But otherwise, she was unharmed. Physically, mentally. The Iron Lady of Chicago was shattered. She was staring at her hands, which were clean now, but she kept rubbing them together as if trying to wash something off. When Dante walked in, she looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and terrified. Is she? Katerina's voice broke. Surgery, Dante said. He walked over to the wet bar, poured a glass of whiskey, and downed it in one swallow. It tasted like water. He poured another. Doctor, Aris is working on her. She jumped, Katerina whispered, almost to herself. She didn't hesitate. Dante. The door opened. I saw the gun. I froze. I have seen guns my whole life, and I froze. She looked at her son, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She is a nobody, a girl from an agency. She makes minimum wage. Why did she do it? Dante stared at the amber liquid in his glass. I don't know. She was shaking the spoon earlier, Katerina sobbed, a sudden, jagged laugh escaping her. I yelled at her because she was shaking the spoon. I told her she was clumsy. She covered her face with her hands. I treated her like a servant, and she died like a soldier. She isn't dead yet, Dante said sharply. He couldn't hear that word. Not yet. He sat down opposite his mother, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He watched the clock on the wall. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9:30 p.m. The silence in the room was suffocating. Rocco came in and out, whispering updates about security, about the lockdown of the city. But Dante waved him away. He didn't care about the city. He cared about the rhythm of the clock. At 11:15 p.m., the double doors opened. Dante was on his feet instantly. Doctor, Aris walked in. He looked exhausted. His surgical cap was in his hand, and there were sweat stains on his scrubs. He walked over to Dante and Katerina. Well, Dante demanded. The single word cracked like a whip. Aris sighed, rubbing his temples. She is alive. Dante let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 5 hours. Katerina crossed herself, murmuring a prayer. But, Aris continued, his face grim, it is bad. Dante, very bad. We had to remove her spleen. She lost a kidney. One bullet collapsed her left lung, and another grazed the L4 vertebrae. She has lost a massive amount of blood. Her heart stopped twice on the table. Dante flinched. Twice. We revived her, Aris said. She is in a medically induced coma to let her body heal. The next 48 hours are critical. Infection, organ failure. Clotting, the list of risks is long. If she wakes up, there is a chance she may never walk again. She will walk, Dante said, a dark refusal in his tone. She will walk if I have to build her legs of gold. We do what we can, Aris said. She is in ICU. You can see her, but only for a moment. Dante nodded. He turned to Rocco. Take my mother to the estate. Triple the guard. No one in or out. Put the compound on lockdown. Dante, come with us, Katerina pleaded. It's not safe here. I am staying, Dante said. Dante, go, mother. He waited until they left. Then he walked down the hallway to the ICU, room 4. The room was dim, lit only by the blinking lights of the monitors. The sound was rhythmic, the whoosh hiss of the ventilator, the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. Dante stepped inside and closed the door. Sienna looked tiny in the hospital bed. She was hooked up to a dozen tubes. Her face was swollen, a tube down her throat breathing for her. Her chest, wrapped in thick bandages, rose and fell mechanically. Her skin was so translucent he could see the blue veins beneath it. She didn't look like the girl who had blended into the background of his penthouse. She looked like a broken angel. Dante approached the bed slowly, as if she were made of glass. He reached out and touched her hand. It was cold, limp. He pulled a chair up to the bedside and sat down. He, the man who terrified seasoned criminals, felt a lump form in his throat. You foolish girl, he whispered to the silence. Why take a bullet for a name that isn't yours? He looked at her face, studying the curve of her jaw, the dark lashes against her pale cheek. He realized he didn't even know the color of her eyes. Brown hazel. He noticed her hands. They were rough, not the soft, manicured hands of the women he usually dated. These were working hands, calloused fingertips, short nails, a small burn scar on the thumb. I don't know who you are. Sienna Cole, Dante said, his voice low and dangerous, a promise made to the universe. But you are under my protection now, and the men who did this to you. He gently squeezed her cold fingers. They are going to wish they had died in that car. Dante didn't sleep. He sat there, holding her hand, watching the monitor, waiting for the sun to rise on a city that was about to bleed. Morning broke over Chicago, gray and dismal, matching the mood inside the Russo stronghold. But Dante wasn't at the stronghold. He was still at the clinic, shaving in the small bathroom of Sienna's recovery room. He had had fresh clothes brought to him, a black tactical suit, more fitting for war than a boardroom. Sienna hadn't moved. The machines kept breathing for her. At 8:00 a.m., Rocco entered the room. He looked nervous. Boss, we got something. Dante wiped the remaining shaving cream from his jaw. He looked at his reflection. His eyes were hard, the golden flecks in the brown buried under layers of ice. Talk. We found the driver of the garbage truck. He bailed before the shooting started, tried to hide in a motel in Gary, Indiana. Our boys picked him up an hour ago. Is he at the warehouse? Yes, sir. He's eager to talk. especially after Sal introduced him to the bolt cutters. Dante nodded. He walked out of the bathroom and went to Sienna's bedside. He leaned down, close to her ear. "I have to go," he whispered. "I have to go handle business, but I will be back. Fight, Sienna. You fight." He left 2 armed guards at her door, men he trusted with his life, and exited the clinic. The warehouse was a soundproofed meatpacking facility in the meatpacking district, a relic of the old days. It smelled of bleach and iron. The driver, a low-level thug named Mickey the Rat, was tied to a chair in the center of the room. He was already in bad shape. His face was swollen, and he was weeping. Dante walked in. He didn't yell. He didn't pick up a weapon. He simply pulled up a metal chair and sat directly in front of Mickey. He crossed his legs and adjusted his cuffs. "Mickey," Dante said softly. The man flinched as if struck. "Mr. Russo, I swear to God, I didn't know it was your mother. They just told me to block the convoy. They said it was a heist." "Who are they?" Dante asked. "I don't know names. It was a text, an encrypted app. They paid in crypto." Dante sighed. He stood up and walked to a table where a variety of tools were laid out. He picked up a heavy wrench, weighing it in his hand. "Mickey, you blocked my mother's car. You trapped her. And a girl, an innocent girl, is currently breathing through a tube because of you." Dante turned, his face void of emotion. "You are going to tell me something better than it was an app?" "It was the Irishman's crew," Mickey screamed, straining against the ropes. "I saw the guy who paid the drop. He had a shamrock tattoo on his neck. It was O'Malley's Lieutenant Finnegan. It was Finnegan." Dante paused. The O'Malley Syndicate. The Irish mob had been quiet for years, adhering to the truce Dante's father had brokered. If they broke it, this wasn't a skirmish. It was a declaration of war. "Finnegan," Dante repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, yes. I swear on my mother's life." Dante looked at Rocco. "Dispose of him." "Wait, no! I told you!" Mickey screamed as Dante turned his back. "You told me what you knew," Dante said, walking toward the exit as the screams intensified behind him. "But you touched my family. There is no currency that buys forgiveness for that." Dante sat in the back of his armored car, rubbing his temples. The O'Malleys. It made sense, in a twisted way. They wanted the port access Dante controlled, but to hit his mother, that was desperate or personal. "Boss, where to the estate?" Rocco asked from the front seat. "No," Dante said. He pulled a file folder out of his briefcase. It was the personnel file for Sienna Cole. He had ordered it the moment the shooting stopped. "Go to 42B Cicero Avenue." Rocco looked in the rearview mirror, confused. "Cicero, that's not a good neighborhood." "Boss." "It's her address," Dante said. He needed to know who she was. He needed to understand the stranger who had saved his world. The building was a crumbling brick tenement on the south side. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. Graffiti covered the peeling wallpaper. Dante, flanked by 2 guards, walked up the 3 flights of stairs. He picked the lock of apartment 3B himself. The door creaked open. Dante expected a mess. He expected the chaotic life of a young woman in the city. What he found was a monk's cell. The apartment was spotlessly clean, but completely bare. There was a thin mattress on the floor in the corner, neatly made. A small table with 1 chair, a kitchenette with no food on the counters. It was freezing. Dante checked the radiator. It was turned off. In October, he walked into the room, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking on the worn linoleum. He opened the refrigerator. a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of peanut butter, 3 apples. That was it. Jesus, Rocco muttered from the doorway. She was living like this. Dante felt a strange twisting in his gut. He paid his staff well. Sienna's salary should have been enough for a decent apartment, heat, and food. Where was the money going? He walked over to the small table. There was a neat stack of envelopes. He picked them up. They were bills, but not for her. Oak Creek Recovery Center. Patient Tobias Cole. Monthly invoice $8,500. Status overdue. There was a second letter, typed in red ink. Final notice. Mr. Cole will be discharged on October 15th if the outstanding balance of $12,000 is not paid in full. October 15th. That was 3 days away. Dante put the letter down. His hand was trembling slightly. He looked around the room again. He saw the details now. The patched-up shoes by the door. The library books on the floor because she couldn't afford to buy them. The handwritten budget on a notepad where she had calculated her expenses down to the penny. Bus fare $2.50. Lunch skip. Toby's meds $40. She was starving herself. She was freezing in the dark. She was working 12-hour shifts dealing with his mother's abuse. All to keep her brother in rehab. And then, when the bullets flew, she didn't hide. She didn't think about her brother then. She thought about Katerina. Dante felt a wave of shame so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. He had looked at her every day for 6 months and seen nothing. He had seen a uniform. He hadn't seen the warrior beneath it. He picked up a framed photo on the windowsill. It was the only personal item in the room. It showed a younger Sienna, smiling, her arm around a skinny, pale boy who looked like her. They were laughing. She looked happy, radiant. He touched the glass over her face. "Rocco," Dante said. His voice was thick. "Boss, call the bank. Wire $50,000 to Oak Creek Recovery Center. Tell them Tobias Cole's treatment is paid for the next year. And tell them if they ever send a threatening letter to this family again, I will buy the facility and fire everyone in it." "Done," Rocco said, typing on his phone. "Then call the real estate manager. Have the penthouse at the marina prepped. The one with the view of the lake." "For who?" "Boss." "For her," Dante said, putting the photo into his jacket pocket, right next to his heart. "She is never coming back to this rat hole. She is never going to be cold again. She is never going to be hungry again." He walked to the door, taking one last look at the empty, freezing room that held the secrets of the woman who had saved him. And Rocco. "Yeah, boss. Find out where Finnegan is tonight. I'm not sending a hit squad." Dante stepped out into the hallway, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "I'm going to kill him myself." The first thing Sienna Cole felt was not pain, but thirst, a dry, scraping thirst that felt like she had swallowed a handful of desert sand. She tried to swallow, but something hard and plastic was in her throat. Panic, sharp and immediate, flared in her chest. She tried to sit up. Her body didn't move. It screamed. A fire hot, white, and blinding erupted in her torso, radiating from her chest to her hip. The monitor beside her exploded into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. "Easy, easy, Sienna. Do not move." The voice was deep, rough, and strangely familiar. A large, warm hand covered hers, pressing it gently back onto the mattress. Sienna blinked, her eyelids feeling like lead weights. The harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU burned her retinas. Slowly, the blur resolved into a face, Dante Russo. But not the Dante Russo she knew, not the immaculate, cold statue in the charcoal suit. This Dante looked like he had been to war. His jaw was covered in heavy stubble. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of days without sleep. He was wearing a wrinkled black t-shirt, and most shocking of all, he was holding her hand with a desperation that terrified her. "Wah!" She tried to speak around the tube. "Water, no. Not yet. The tube has to come out first," Dante said. He looked over his shoulder. "Nurse, she's awake. Get Aris in here now." The next hour was a haze of doctors, bright lights, and the sickening sensation of the extubation. When the tube finally slid out, Sienna retched, her abdominal muscles contracting in agony. Dante was there instantly, supporting her head, wiping her mouth with a cool cloth. "Breathe," he commanded softly. Just breathe. When the room finally cleared, leaving only the rhythmic beep-beep of the heart monitor, Sienna slumped back against the pillows. She felt hollowed out, broken. She turned her head slowly to look at him. He was sitting in a plastic chair pulled right up to the bed rails, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tight. "Mrs. Russo," Sienna whispered. Her voice was a ruin, a rasp of sandpaper. Dante closed his eyes for a second, a muscle in his jaw jumping. "She's at the estate. She's safe. Not a scratch on her." Sienna let out a breath, her eyes fluttering shut. "Good. That's good. Good." Dante's voice rose, cracking slightly. "You took 5 bullets. Sienna, you lost your spleen. A kidney. You died on that table twice. And your first question is about the woman who yelled at you for shaking a spoon." Sienna opened her eyes. She saw the anger in his face, but she realized with a jolt that it wasn't directed at her. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear, masked as rage. "It was my job," she whispered. "No!" Dante growled, leaning in close, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Your job was to pour tea and read books. Your job was not to be a human shield." "I didn't think," she admitted. "I just saw the gun." "You saved her life," Dante said, his voice dropping to a reverence she had never heard before. "You saved my mother. You saved the only thing in this world I care about." He paused, looking down at her battered hand. "Until now." Sienna's heart skipped a beat, the monitor speeding up in betrayal. "Beep, beep, beep." "My brother," she rasped, panic suddenly gripping her again. "Toby. The facility. If I missed work, the payment. Tuesday was the deadline. They'll kick him out." She tried to push herself up, ignoring the agony. "I have to call them. I have to." "Sienna, stop," Dante said firmly, putting his hands on her shoulders. "It's handled." She froze. "What? Toby is fine. The facility is paid for." "I have some savings," she stammered, confused. "I can transfer. Paid in full." "Sienna," Dante cut her off. "For the next 5 years, including his therapy, his housing, and his college tuition when he gets out." Sienna stared at him, her mouth slightly open. 5 years. That's thousands of dollars. I can't pay you back. I make $18 an hour. Dante let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "You think I want your money? You bought that with your blood. Sienna, you bought his future with your life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked. "I went to your apartment," he said quietly. Sienna felt a cold flush of shame. He had seen it. The emptiness, the poverty she tried so hard to hide, the radiator that didn't work, the peanut butter jar. "I'm sorry it's a mess," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. I didn't have time to tidy up. Don't apologize, Dante said fiercely. Never apologize to me. I saw the letters. I saw what you were doing. You were starving yourself for him. He took her hand again, squeezing it gently. That life is over. Do you hear me? You are never going back to that apartment. You are never going to be cold again. I don't understand, she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. Why are you here? You're Dante Russo. I'm just the help. Dante stood up. He towered over the bed, blocking out the harsh lights, casting a shadow that felt strangely protective. You are not the help, he said. You are the woman who walked through fire for my family when my own men ran. You are a Russo now, Sienna, and Russos take care of their own. Before she could respond, the door opened. A nurse wheeled Katerina in. The old woman looked smaller than Sienna remembered. Frail. When she saw Sienna awake, she let out a sob that sounded like a child's cry. She tried to stand up from her wheelchair, her legs shaking. Mama, sit down, Dante warned. Hush, Dante, Katerina snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. She wheeled herself to the bedside. She reached out with trembling hands and cupped Sienna's face. I am a wicked old woman, Katerina wept, tears streaming into the deep lines of her face. I treated you like a ghost, and you gave me a life. Signora, please, Sienna whispered, overwhelmed. No more Signora, Katerina said, kissing Sienna's forehead. You call me Katerina. You are my daughter now, and if this idiot son of mine doesn't treat you like a queen, I will shoot him myself. Dante watched them, the two women who had nearly died in the rain. He felt a tightening in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He had spent his life building walls, amassing power, turning his heart into a vault. And one girl, with zero power and a heart too big for her chest, had shattered it all in 5 seconds. He walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, somewhere out there. Finnegan was hiding, somewhere out there. The men who put those holes in Sienna were breathing. Dante's expression hardened into a mask of death. Enjoy your breath, he thought, because I'm coming to take it. Recovery was not a montage. It was a slow, grueling hell. 2 weeks later, Sienna was discharged from the clinic. She was not taken to her apartment on Cicero Avenue. She was taken to the Russo estate, a sprawling fortress in Lake Forest, surrounded by 12-foot iron gates and patrolled by men with assault rifles. She was given the East Wing suite, a room larger than her entire apartment building. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens, a fireplace that was always lit, and a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. But Sienna couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the pop, pop, pop of the gunfire. She felt the impact. She smelled the blood. She woke up screaming 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, the door to her suite opened. Dante was there. He was wearing pajama bottoms and a t-shirt, his feet bare. He held a glass of warm milk and a bottle of pills. Pain, he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Memories, she whispered, pulling the silk sheets up to her chin. She was sweating, shivering. Dante set the glass down and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't try to hug her. He knew she was fragile. He simply sat there, a solid, immovable presence in the dark. Tell me, he said. I see his face, Sienna said, staring at the shadows. The gunman, he looked bored, like he was taking out the trash. He is dead, Dante said flatly. I killed him. He can't hurt you. His friends can. Dante turned to her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face. No, they can't, because I am hunting them down, one by one. It was true. While Sienna healed, Chicago was burning. The newspapers called it a gangland reshuffling. The police called it a bloodbath. Dante Russo was systematically dismantling the Irish mob. Warehouses belonging to the O'Malleys mysteriously caught fire. Shipments of drugs were intercepted and dumped into the lake. Lieutenants were found beaten in alleyways with one-way tickets to Ireland, stapled to their jackets. Dante was at war. But every night at 7 p.m., he was at the estate for dinner. He would sit at the long mahogany table, with Caterina on one side and Sienna on the other. Sienna, still weak, would pick at her food. Dante would watch her, his plate untouched until he saw her eat. "Eat the protein," he would say gently. "Doctor, Aris said you need iron. I'm not hungry. Dante, for me," he would plead, and she would eat. The intimacy between them grew in the quiet moments. It wasn't a romance of flowers and dates. It was a romance of survival. One evening, 3 weeks after the shooting, Sienna was trying to walk down the hallway. Her physical therapist had left for the day. She was using a cane, her steps slow and agonizing, her side stitched with pain where the spleen used to be. She stumbled. She didn't hit the floor. Dante caught her. He had been walking behind her, shadowing her steps like a guardian angel. He scooped her up into his arms effortlessly. "I can walk," she protested, breathless, her face inches from his neck. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive scotch. "You're trembling," he noted. He carried her not to her room, but to the library. He sat on the large leather sofa, settling her onto his lap. "Dante, this is quiet," he murmured. He began to massage her calf, where the muscle had cramped. His hands were large, strong, but incredibly gentle. "Why are you doing this?" Sienna asked, her voice small. "You have an army of servants. You have nurses." Dante didn't look up from her leg. "Because they didn't almost die for me. I'm just a waitress. Dante, a companion. This doesn't make sense." Dante stopped. He looked at her, his eyes dark and intense. "You think you're just a waitress, Sienna? The whole city is talking about you. They call you the Iron Angel. My men who kill for a living, they toast your name in the barracks. You are not a waitress. You are the only person in this house with a pure soul." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "And I am terrified," he whispered. "I am terrified that I am going to ruin you. I am a bad man. Sienna, I do bad things." "I know," she whispered, her hand instinctively touching the scar on his cheek. "But you're good to me." He kissed her then. It wasn't a hungry, demanding kiss. It was desperate. It was a kiss of gratitude, of apology, of a man drowning who had found a raft. Sienna kissed him back, tasting the scotch and the sorrow on his lips. The moment was shattered by the ring of his phone. Dante pulled back, breathless. He looked at the caller. ID. His face hardened instantly. The lover vanished. The butcher returned. "Rocco, speak." He listened for 10 seconds. His eyes went cold. "Are you sure?" He listened again. "Bring the car around. We move in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Sienna. The softness was gone, replaced by a terrifying resolve. "What is it?" she asked, clutching his shirt. "Finnegan," Dante said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "We found him. He's trying to leave the country tonight on a private charter out of Midway." "Dante, don't," she pleaded. Let the police handle it." "The police will give him a lawyer," Dante said, walking to the hidden gun safe behind a painting of the Roman Colosseum. He punched in the code. The door hissed open, revealing an arsenal. He selected a black pistol, checking the chamber with a metallic clack. "I am going to give him a grave." He turned to her. "Stay in this room. Rocco has the perimeter. Do not open the door for anyone but me." "Dante." He walked out. The door clicked shut. The lock engaged. Sienna sat alone in the library, the taste of his kiss still on her lips, listening to the sound of engines roaring to life in the driveway. The war of roses was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The grandfather clock in the library chimed midnight, the sound echoing through the strangely silent Russo estate. Sienna paced the hardwood floor, her cane clicking rhythmically. Her side throbbed where the spleen used to be, a phantom pain that flared whenever danger was near. Dante had taken the Alpha team to Midway Airport an hour ago. Intelligence suggested Finnegan, the Irish mob boss, was fleeing the country. The house was left with a skeleton crew, and Sienna had been ordered to lock herself in. Click! The sound came from the service entrance. It was soft, almost imperceptible. The alarm didn't chime. Sienna froze. Only family had the bypass codes. She moved to the heavy oak desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remembered the hidden gun safe behind the painting. Dante had left it unlocked in his haste. Her hands shook as she pulled out the heavy snub-nose revolver. She had never fired a gun, but she gripped it with both hands, aiming at the library door. The handle turned. The lock, engaged only moments ago, was picked in seconds. The door swung open. It wasn't a hitman in a mask. It was Carlo Russo, Dante's cousin, the man who managed the family's legitimate finances, the man who had brought Sienna tea just yesterday. "Carlo," she whispered, the betrayal hitting her harder than a bullet. Carlo smiled, closing the door behind him. He held a silenced pistol loosely at his side. "Hello, Sienna. You really should be in bed. Recovery takes rest." "You bypassing the alarm?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why?" "Because the airport is a decoy," Carlo said, stepping closer. "Finnegan isn't at Midway. I sent Dante there to chase a ghost while I clean up the loose ends here. You see, the Irish didn't want a war. I did. I leak the route. Dante dies. I take the throne. Simple." He raised his gun. "Dante is a relic. He rules with honor. I will rule with profit." "He'll kill you," Sienna warned, backing against the desk. "He has to catch me first." Carlo laughed. "Say goodbye. Waitress." Sienna didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. Bang! The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The shot went wide, shattering a vase on the mantel. Carlo flinched, then sneered, leveling his weapon at her chest. But before he could fire, the heavy velvet curtains behind him exploded inward. Glass shattered as a dark figure swung through the terrace window, colliding with Carlo like a freight train. It was Dante. He hadn't gone to the airport. Carlo screamed as Dante pinned him to the floor, knocking the gun away. "Dante, we're blood. You are not blood." Dante roared, his hands wrapping around his cousin's throat. His face was a mask of biblical wrath. "You are a cancer." Sienna watched, paralyzed, as the King of Chicago extinguished the threat. It was over in seconds. The silence that followed was heavier than the violence. Dante stood up, straightening his suit. He looked at the body, then at Sienna. He saw the gun in her hand and the terror in her eyes. He walked over, gently prying the weapon from her fingers. "I thought you were at the airport." she sobbed, collapsing into him. I knew, Dante whispered into her hair, holding her so tight she could feel his heart racing. I knew it was him. The airport was a trap for him, not me. I was waiting on the terrace. I just needed him to show his hand. He kissed her forehead, his voice breaking. I would never leave you unprotected. Never. 1 year later, the wind off Lake Michigan was biting, but inside the new penthouse overlooking Navy Pier, the air was warm. Sienna stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The angry red scars on her torso had faded to silvery lines. She traced them absently. Stop staring at them, a deep voice rumbled. Dante walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed the scar on her shoulder. They are proof that you are stronger than me. I'm not, Sienna smiled, leaning back against him. You are, he insisted. You turned a butcher into a husband. Life had changed. The war was over. The Russo Empire now ran with a quiet, lethal efficiency. But the chaos was gone. Toby was a sophomore at Northwestern, studying engineering on a scholarship Dante had set up. Katerina was living in the guest wing, currently knitting aggressive amounts of baby clothes for a great-grandchild she insisted was inevitable. Are you ready? Dante asked. For what? He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't his style. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was a vintage ruby, dark as blood, surrounded by black diamonds. Marry me. Sienna, he said, his eyes vulnerable for the first time in his life. Not for protection, not for the family. Marry me because I cannot breathe when you are not in the room. Sienna looked at the ring, then at the man who had pulled her from the wreckage of her poverty and given her a kingdom. Yes, she whispered, turning to kiss him. Always yes. The girl who was invisible had become the queen, and the king who had no heart had found it in the trajectory of a bullet. 5 bullets. That's what it took to shatter the hierarchy of the Chicago underworld. Sienna Cole didn't just save a life that day. She saved a soul. Her story reminds us that true loyalty isn't bought, it's bled for. It proves that even in a world built on darkness, love can still be the most dangerous weapon of all. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Sienna's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twisted tale of romance and danger. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next shadow.
Красят яйца и пекут куличи. И делают Пасху. Вот, все, что я знаю. Кайф. Я этим не занимаюсь. А вы занимаетесь? Привет, Флеймер. Короче, вот такие грустные дела. Сейчас припудрюсь. Завтра выпуск «Беременна в 16». А мы не смотрим «Беременна в 16», мы такое не любим. Ну, не знаю, насчет них я не люблю смотреть такое. Я куплю 5 куличей и колу. Необычный микс. Почему не с чаем? Нет, он постоянно ест морковь. Он обожает морковь. Кулич покупай, яйца покрашу в луке. По-модному гонка спирита занимается. Я играл в CS 1.5 версию. Ник был И там на мирке Номер 1 приставка была или GK. И я решил ебошки. Ебошки. Понятно. В луке это по-староверски. Ну, я не знаю, кстати, у меня мама никогда так не делала. Она обычно покупала какую-то краску и разводила в этом. В стаканчиках, и потом опускала туда. Как-то так. Понятно. Меня как-то подруга угощала куличами, которые они делали на продажу. Но мне не понравилось. И я об этом не сказала ей. Привет, Тёма. Вот. Мне вообще, как будто вот какой-то хлеб. Не забанит за мой ник. А я и не переживаю, забанит, не забанит. Я куличи в последние годы перестала есть каждый раз все меньше и меньше, хотя раньше с чаем обожала. Сейчас как-то все равно. Праздник, не признаю, поэтому толку. Но мне нравилась в детстве именно вот эта белая посыпка. Я белую посыпку съедала и все. Ну и еще выбирала изюм и, возможно, ела хлеб. Как дела? Да нормально, а у тебя как? Сверху-то что? Ну вот эта белая штучка, которая заливается. Я не помню, как она называется. Глазурь? Вообще, кстати, как-то я покупала в Магните один кулич. И он был такой, знаете, типа творожный кулич. И он был такой очень мягкий, нежный. Больше такой не пробовала. О, Каспарита, мне только творожные куличи заходят. Они не просто булкосочные. Да, вообще, было очень вкусно. Помнишь, я кофейню покупал? Да, я помню. Я потом у тебя еще спрашивала, Тема, как успехи? Ты сказал, что там что-то владелец либо не захотел скинуть. Ну, короче, что-то ты сказал, что владелец там что-то с ума сходил, и ты не стал ее брать. Я менял на машину. В смысле, ты же сказал, что ты не купил кофейню. Как ты мог ее обменять на машину? Я в детстве тоже посыпку любила, но позже признала его весь. Бело-сладкая бодяга. Ну, она, кстати, вообще-то делается вроде из яйца, сахара, ну, что-то такого. Короче, как вот эти есть десерты такие, как они называются, сейчас скажу. Безе. Вот по безе похоже по составу. Сейчас в КБ творожный продают. Надо зайти посмотреть. Я купил другую, обменял на машину. Ну, не знаю, как-то странно. Что-то как-то странно, ребят. Привет, Ктикс. А я куличи никогда не любил. Лучше кексики с чаем попить. Но кексики как-то не распространены в этот праздник. Либо, может, сейчас кто-нибудь делает. Лекс Тенс, привет. Хай. Маритас, привет. Как у вас дела, что хорошего расскажете? Ново присоединишься. Фезу, привет. Ты умеешь блины печь? Да, вообще. Блины, блинчики, да, умею. Алиса. Лео лежит грустно и спит. Ну как, не спит, он смотрит, но мне ее жалко. Я бы рядом с ним легла спать. Подслушивает. Сказал приятных снов. Привет, владыка. Всегда первый блин комом. Алиса, стоп. Миха, привет. Нет, расскажите что-нибудь хорошее. Ребят, хочу смеяться 5 минут. Расскажите анекдот. Хьюморос, привет. Как Лео поживает этой ночью, не наваливал контента? Наваливал, ребят. Как раз жаловалась, что наваливал, записала его сегодня к врачу на 15:10. Вот. Сейчас собака у меня голодная. Не, на самом деле позитивное то, что он такой, типа, ну, веселый, как бы активный живчик. Не то, что он грустит. Как бы это уже плюс. Нет, загадку не хочу. Вам нравятся турецкие песни? Турецкие песни, да. Турецкие песни топ. А при чем тут блины? Дегустатор. Анекдот? Да, анекдот давайте. Ой, как анекдот, это что-то смешное. Да, анекдот, пожалуйста. а он тебя не хочет. Понятно, понятно, вот так и живем. Так и живем. Привет, Редарк Дюк. А че ты ВКонтакте зашел? Как там работа? IGMS Enigma, привет. У меня на работе завал, поэтому хороших новостей нет. Единственное, что могу высказать, что ненавижу прокуратуру. Они у нас занимаются вообще не тем, чем должны. Интересно. Чем они должны заниматься и чем они не занимаются? Я тоже турчанка, решил проверить трансляцию, там играла турецкая песня. На прошлой трансляции ты имеешь в виду или экстенс? Или где? Все, собака устала и спит. Сейчас сфоткаю себе на память. Да. В центре не робит Twitch. А, точно, точно. Работа третий день, я начинаю скучать. Слишком все легко. Нет, ну если хорошая зарплата и все легко, надо вообще радоваться. Как тебе такой ретардик? Привет, Седжа. Сфоткала. Да, это я Лео сфоткала. У тебя тоже все фотоленты в телефоне в собаках и кошках? Угу. Да. Ну еще я улицу фоткаю. Там я в тот раз гуляла, и там были на кустике воробьи. Ну такой, знаете, может какая-нибудь сирень была. Вот я этих воробьев фоткала. Тоже завал дедлайна, но время попинать балду и покушать нахожу. Не, ну как без этого-то? Ладно, хоть не в счетчиках. Блин, вы мне напомнили, надо за квартиру заплатить. Нет, я, конечно, вчера помнила, но сегодня я уже забыла. Надо написать, что я приду. Я не понимаю, но мне весело. Плюс. ЗП норм, скучновато. Нет, ну прикинь. Тебе станет скучно, ты решишь сменить работу, и там будет полный завал, вообще лютый, но ты будешь получать так же. А так ты можешь, может, ты чем-нибудь можешь изучать в этот момент, пока тебе скучно там. Какие-нибудь ролики классно посмотреть. Докс, привет. Не очень, а у тебя? Вчера сметанку купил и варенье подарили из крыжовника. Буду блинами объедаться. Вон, за блины заговорили. Лучше уж пусть на работе будет скучновато, чем завал. Ну, может быть, потом появятся какие-нибудь клиенты, дадут шума.